U.S. President Donald Trump and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau are going to speak this morning. This is ahead of widespread tariffs that will take effect on both countries tomorrow.
The actions taken today by the White House split us apart instead of bringing us together.
Trudeau has announced retaliatory measures after the U.S. put 25% tariffs on all Canadian goods, 10% on our energy and oil exports. So this morning, world markets are reacting negatively to this news and the tariffs that were also announced against Mexico and China. For more on this economic news this morning is John Ehrlichman, financial commentator. Great to have you here.
Good to see you.
Let's start with world markets. How are they reacting early?
Yeah, well, Lindsey kicked off the hour talking about how the market hates uncertainty. That always happens. It's a living, breathing thing. It reacts to everything, even if there was an anticipation that we could see tariffs. Once you get to the finish line and perhaps beyond, now people have to start calculating how that impacts different businesses. So the simple story is investors just take their foot off the buying gas. It's been a pretty robust stock market, let's face it, for months and months. A bull
Even
market.
on Friday, we didn't see as much of a hit as we are seeing today.
You know, I think this is the challenge in dealing with President Trump is you just never know. And even now, we're not quite sure, right? What comes out of the conversation with the Prime Minister, and is there any wiggle room? So you've got, on the one hand, economists who are trying to map out what this could mean for our economy and the global economy, but what if something doesn't happen? So that's the challenge when most of the stock market is based on assumptions on where we're going, all these models on what's going to happen. When profits are less predictable, then you start to see an impact. So just as an example, in the pre-market today, one of the easiest groups to sell has been car companies, auto stocks, because how often have we talked about how many times a vehicle in North America
the parts go back and forth before the finished product,
right? So you've got immediately analysts who come out and say it's going to make each new car a lot more expensive. So if you're an automaker and you know that it's going to be tougher to sell a competitively priced car, what does that mean for your business? So we don't know for sure, but the stock market just reacts by selling now and asking questions later. Cars, clothing. Obviously, we think about the Canada-U.S. relationship, but just as an example, you've got a lot of Canadian apparel makers that have ties to China. Aritzia would be a great example of that. You know, they've already been trying to fine-tune their supply chain, so we'll see what happens on that front. Commodities is an obvious one. I guess I would lump farming into that. We keep talking about like avocado prices and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, certainly for us, even if there is a lower tariff rate for energy coming from Canada, there's still a lot of math to figure out there. Is there going to be a bigger gap between the pricing for Canadian oil and U.S. oil? So those are three big ones. Booze is another. We're seeing a big booze operator, Constellation Brands, which brings in Modelo from Mexico, which has been under pressure in the pre-market. So you start to see people go for the easier areas to target in the pre-market when there's still uncertainty they don't know.
Is there potentially worse to come? Because although we have a date and an amount for Mexico, Canada, China, there's now this threat from President Trump about also putting tariffs on the UK and the EU.
Well, I think at the end of the day, we're seeing each country, including our own, react to Trump tariffs. And I think there were a lot of people in the business community and maybe even, you know, in the world of economics who said, even though we don't think tariffs makes a lot of sense, tit-for-tat tariffs could make things a lot worse economically. So, you know, we keep talking about, does this lead to a recession in Canada? It's hard not to see how it wouldn't if the full scale of this were to roll on and on and on, and we just don't know if that's going to happen.
Can I ask you about that timeline? Because we know that the pain is coming and we're going to feel it down the road. And you'll say things like on and on and on, but I feel like this morning people don't know, like, when is that coming? Is it a month from now? Is it next week?
Does anybody really know when it's coming? I mean, I think, isn't this the playbook of the president that keeps us?
That's why I brought you here.
Well, I will say this. In the early stages of this, after the election, and people started trying to figure out not just what it meant for Canada's economy, but the global economy, they made a calculation that the president would perhaps use this as a negotiating ploy, and that there would be, I mean, the president does love this tariff strategy. Let's not shy away from that.
He said last week, tariffs make us very rich, they make us very secure.
Right. So, yes, he monitors the stock market, and if stock prices are going down a lot, he'll see that. And if oil prices are shooting up, they're up this morning, he's not necessarily going to like that because he wants oil to be lower, because that was part of his election pledge as well. But the idea of tariffs, he really likes that. So when you're trying to game this out, initially some economists said, if you see selected targeted tariffs for a period of time, it will take some time for that to be worked into the economies of the world, and we could actually have similar growth globally this year than last year. But again, that's before you've worked in all these other bells and whistles on where we're going
And
here.
Trump addressed that yesterday by saying we're going to feel basically some short-term pain, long-term gain for American citizens. I want to ask you about the Canadian dollar. We are sitting around 67, 68 cents on the dollar.
Yeah.
Could that go lower?
Yes.
Ouch.
It could. Yeah, I mean, we're already at our weakest level in about 2+ decades here. But again, you start to figure out how these pieces come together. Remember that generally, not always, but if you're seeing lower interest rates, that tends to weaken our currency against others, number one. Number two, right now, because of the uncertainty, like I'll just, as a final comment, tech stocks, right? Tech companies aren't going to lose a lot of money over the long term, but their shares are down this morning because people are moving away from risk. What do they like when they're not feeling risky? They buy the U.S. currency. So you've seen a lot of strength for the U.S. dollar. That weakens our currency. But the combination of tariffs and then the need to further reduce interest rates in this country, which isn't necessarily a bad thing for people who have a mortgage or what have you, that could lead to more weakness in the Canadian dollar, even though we've already seen a lot. So we'll have to see how that
So interest rates could go up as a result of this?
Well, that's an interesting question. The Bank of Canada governor, so rates came down last week, and the Bank of Canada governor put together this whole playbook on how they're going to deal with tariffs. There's a pretty good chance interest rates are just going to steadily continue to come down in this country. But in the U.S., because the economy's been in better shape, their central bank said, you know, we're not ready to actually do something similar. So then there's a differential between rates. That means a weaker Canadian dollar. So many moving parts here.
Yeah. Doesn't it feel weird to be in an economic trade war with the United States this morning and the language that we're using back and forth? It feels bizarre to me.
It does. It does. Yeah.
And to a lot of people at home, too. John, thanks for coming in today.
Thanks
we appreciate it. I know it's a busy one. If you liked that video, make sure to subscribe to the Your Morning YouTube feed, where you can find all kinds of new content posted every weekday morning.